Hello, everyone. My name is Lois. I'm with the Pan-African Center for AI Ethics. And the sub-module for today we're going to be addressing is AI and journalism regulations. And so we're going to be looking at the ethical free journalism. So we're going to be examining some case studies before we go into what legal or regulatory framework do we have in place to protect the use of AI in journalism. And the first case study we'll be looking at is copyright infringement and AI's impact on media revenues. I'm sure we're all aware that, the use of persons' data, their information, or even just, trying to tell what is going on, storytelling in media would mean that we come in contact with personal data. And sometimes some of this personal data could be data that is protected. Sometimes we could be using some person's intellectual work. So we're going to be looking at the most popular case the most important case we're going to be starting with is, I'm sure everyone has heard it's between the New York Daily and some other newspapers that sued OpenAI and Microsoft over copyright infringement. So OpenAI and Microsoft, their AI, they make use of ChatGPT and other large LLMs. They make use of information. I know we keep hearing the word algorithm. It seems a bit technical or complex, especially for persons with journalistic background. But what I want you to understand about this is when you are training large language models, nothing is built, nothing is got from nothing. You have to train from existing data. You can't just manufacture data if you want to ensure accuracy. I'm sure we know there's synthetic data, but it's not yet accurate enough. So when ChatGPT, when Llama, when they were training Claudia, when they were training their AI, they made use of data in form of scraping the internet and web crawling. They trained they got a lot of data from the internet and they used it to train their AI systems. So New York Daily News and Chicago Tribune sued OpenAI and Microsoft over copyright infringement, where they found out that some of their copyrighted articles were being used without their consent to train AI models. And there was no form of reference to take viewers or users of these AI systems back to the original source, which was their website. So when you go online, when you go to ChatGPT and you type in something and you're looking for information, if ChatGPT is not able to redirect you somewhere and it's giving you some form of information that's supposed to be authoritative, that's supposed to be, would I say, investigated, information that seems credible, and there seems to be no source where you're getting it from, then you should begin to become skeptical about the kind of information that you're getting from ChatGPT. So in this case, they sued because they felt like their copyright was infringed on, and it sort of reduced their revenue, because then most persons that were licensed to New York Daily News and Chicago Tribune, licensed to their weekly news articles, they unsubscribed because they felt they could get this information from ChatGPT without having to subscribe to the newsrooms. So they were sued on that note. There was also a recent case, and I was very glad to read up about this case because this case happened just, I think, about a week or two ago, where Canadian newspapers like the Globe and Mail and Toronto Star also filed a class action against OpenAI for something similar to what the Chicago Tribune and New York Daily News had sued OpenAI on, in scraping their data, leading to subscription losses and general loss of revenue. So I think we can go to case study 2. We have the ethical and legal implications of AI in journalism. So in 2024, I don't know if any of you here is a big F1 fan, but back then in 2020, in the early 2010s, we had a racer, Michael Schumacher. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but he used to be quite popular back then, because before we had the likes of Lewis Hamilton, he was on top of his game before he had an accident. And unfortunately for him, in May 2024, there was a German magazine called I don't know if I'll pronounce this properly, but Aktuelle. So this German magazine, what they did was they curated a form of interview session. It was all AI generated. And this interview session, you can go to the next slide, please. This interview session, which was AI generated, they had a chatbot pretend as if it was having a conversation with Michael to check up on his well-being and if he will be returning back to F1 racing. Of course, his family sued on his behalf because his family stood on his behalf because the whole conversation wasn't just AI generated. It wasn't even obvious enough that it was AI generated. They just stipulated somewhere at the bottom after the interview, the whole interview. So that means if you are logging into the website, after you have finished reading the whole interview, you will then find at the very bottom that this news has been AI generated. Already there have been preconceived notions or biases persons would have established from reading this news on their website. So his family sued for this misleading headline, and they were able to win damages against the magazine. Now that we've looked at cases that are highlighting issues of transparency, responsibility, ethics in presenting information, and violating individual privacy, I want us to now look at what we have as existing regulations for AI and journalism. We'll be starting first with the international and regional scope. Then we'll be going into the country scope to see what regulations do we have that can protect journalists or can stipulate guidelines or rules of conduct to ensure that journalists are making sure that whatever information they're disseminating is done in an ethical manner. So the first one we'll be looking at is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So before we go into that, I want to first establish something. There is no, as of today, there is no regulation, no existing legal instrument that clearly stipulates protections or guidelines for journalists in AI, for AI generated content. However, there have been some guidelines, some articles that have been published to help journalists in ensuring that information is disseminated properly, but there hasn't been any form of existing legal instruments that specifies penalties or punishment for persons that may breach individual privacy, or persons that make use of AI generated content without disclosing it to viewers. So the first regulation we have here is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So what we will be doing is we'll be trying to see how some existing regulatory frameworks that have touched on media, have touched on journalism, have some protections or have made some protections for journalists in executing their duties. And what we'll be doing is when we look at these regulations, we will then try to predict how laws that will be generated in the future for AI content in journalism, how it will be structured or how it will be framed. So the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Article 9 of this charter, ensures the freedom of the right to receive information and disseminate opinions within the law. And this charter is one of the protections that journalists have regionally within the African space in ensuring that they are able to carry out their duties and their functions effectively. Also, in the international community, we have the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedom. And what Article 10 of this convention states is that individuals have a right to freedom of expression, and this right is fundamental. And media houses, media outlets can come under the umbrella of this Article 10 because they are carrying out their duties, but whatever duties they're carrying out, they're also doing it in an individual capacity. We also have in the United States the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So this act was actually for protecting copyrighted works and ensuring penalties for infringement of these works. The closest I would say, we may have in the African sphere, maybe Data Protection Acts that we have of various African countries. So this particular act, some of the protections of copyrighted works ensure that journalists in making use of personal data will handle digital content in a way that is responsible, is transparent. The person that they are making use of their data, they are aware for what purposes their data is being used, in what context it is being used. If you recall, when Ruth was speaking, she said something about how sometimes something she says, her utterances may be used sometimes, but in a context that doesn't reflect what she meant when she was speaking with whoever it is that published her work. So we see here that these are protections that that countries have begun to anticipate. And hopefully, when we look at African countries will be able to, hopefully, with the trajectory of AI development, have laws that guarantee the protection of journalists and guidelines for carrying out their duties. So I'm just going to be touching on a few African countries that have had some regulations that we could interpret with the use of AI for how you can carry out your function as a journalist or as a media house. The first one is the Nigerian Data Protection Act of 2023, and this act addresses data use. However, the act makes sure that it envisages that sometimes personal data may be used by journalists, and journalists do not fall under the category of data controllers or data processors. So Section 3, subsection 2A provides for exemptions for persons that are in media in managing personal data, so that no Tom, Dick, and Harry can just carry them to court and say, oh, you made use of my personal data. The Nigerian Data Protection Act provides that you cannot just use my personal data in XYZ manner. So the act has already foreseen that there may be instances like this. And just to let you know, as an addition, it's not just media houses that have some forms of protection. Sometimes some of this personal data can be protected in some other context, maybe for national security context. Sometimes even in the medical space, there may be some protections for medical personnel in the use of personal data. For example, in experiments where, person's data may be used for carrying out some form of experiments. So it's all for public good. It's all about national interest, public interest, and public good. So when you see that data is being used in any of these contexts, let's be assured that there will most likely be a form of regulation that is protecting persons. The second exemption that is obtainable, we have Kenya's Data Protection Act, and Section 52 of that act covers for publication of materials for public interest. You see what I said about public interest and national interest. So where there is national interest, you cannot try to say, persons cannot make use of my data, or persons cannot, because of course your personal data can be personal, but in some instances, members of the public need to be informed on certain things, although there will be provisions made for the protection of some form of sensitive information, because no journalist is just going to, publish your address or tell everyone your business out there. So the last one I want to talk about is the Paris Charter on AI and Journalism. So this charter was launched in 2023 by Reporters Without Borders, and thankfully some African countries are represented there. For example, Uganda and South Africa had some representatives sitting as members to this charter, and the charter released a document for how media outlets and journalists should make sure that when they are making use of personal data, they are transparent enough in what they are doing. At the same time, it also made some stipulations that I want to add here. The first one is AI governance, and we see here that the charter provided that journalists should be involved in AI governance. I'm sure you've probably been hearing about AI governance. So let me quickly just explain what AI governance is. AI governance is the whole framework on the regulation of AI. So we have persons from the legal background, from policy background, from technical backgrounds, from philosophical backgrounds. And what this Paris Charter on AI and Journalism was saying was that, what the members of the charter were saying was that journalists should also make sure that they have a seat at the table when it comes to AI governance, because they are part of the AI ecosystem. Information is very important. In fact, we've seen how important information has been, especially in the context of election. So let me quickly mention this before I move on to the next slide. What I wanted to say was that the charter also said that there should be a public record of AI systems used and the conditions of their use. So if you're a media house or a media outlet, you have to make sure that in any form of AI system you use, you are able to document, this is the AI system I'm using, right? This is the API I'm working on. This is the AI system that I am using. These are the conditions of the use of my AI system, because persons that are interfacing with this system, your viewers, your audience, they want to be sure that whatever information they are getting, they know what source it is coming from. So it's not enough to just quote and say, oh, this information was created using ChatGPT, which is important. But your media outlet also has to be transparent enough to let people know these are the conditions of use. So you have to explain to them the sort of contract or the sort of conditional use that you must have agreed to with ChatGPT before you are able to use their AI in your workplace for your personal tasks. So the EU AI Act has already set a precedent. The act was passed earlier this year, and it has set a precedent for media protection. Article 11 mandates that there should be technical documentation of high-risk AI systems. So if you know that's why I mentioned ChatGPT, because ChatGPT we would say it's a high-risk AI system. So we have about 4 categorizations of AI systems. ChatGPT is high up there because it can cause some fundamental, it can have some fundamental implications on a large part of society should anything go wrong. So you should have some form of documentation, which just goes back to what was said at the Paris Charter for AI and Journalism. I would say that, unlike EU regulations, the AI Act has a broad exemption for national security. So in some instances where maybe journalists are making use of personal data, and personal data is any data that makes a person identifiable. Let me clarify this. Is any data that a person can be used to identify a person. For example, my name is my personal data, my age, my gender. These are things that we will classify as personal data. Where I live, these are things that are identifiable because they are unique to me. So that is what personal data is all about. So moving on to the next slide. We say that Article 52 of the Act is specifically provides for citizenry privacy. So, and the right to know about the use of AI. So anyone that is, if you are a journalist, if you are a media house, if you are a content creator, it's not enough to just, it's not enough to just, as a content creator, open maybe a social media site and just publish anything. If you made use of AI, you are supposed to disclose to persons viewing that you made use of AI, especially because you want to avoid legal implications. You want to avoid, anybody trying to probe or any questions being asked that may show that you have not been transparent enough in how your information was generated. So we can move to the next slide. I'm trying to work with time here. So let's go to the risks associated with AI-driven journalism. The first risk associated with AI journalism, well, let me just explain what it means when we say risks associated. Risks associated with AI-driven journalism means that when you are making use of AI systems, or when you are being an automated journalist, when you're assuming that role, there are certain risks that you have to take note of. There are certain things you have to be conscious of. It's not enough to make use of AI and say, oh, AI is good because it helps me do A, B, C. Yes, that's true. But you also have to be aware of the risks associated with AI, because if you're not aware of the risks, and I'm sure some of us here know some of these risks, but if you're not aware of the risks, then you may run into a situation where you could, incur maybe legal suit, like we saw some of those use cases previously, and you can get to a situation where you mislead your audience, which will be very detrimental to public trust in such a journalist or a media house. The first one is the misuse of deepfakes. So the greatest risk to AI journalism right now is the potential for misinformation and disinformation, especially as regards the electoral context. And the reason for this is because deepfakes, like we all know, let me just explain what deepfakes is. Let me not assume we all know. So deepfakes are synthetic content, AI-generated content that are created with the intention to mislead persons that view them, audiences that, interact with them. And these deepfakes can be misused by bad actors. We've seen, a lot of instances of deepfakes from our local context, even to our international context. The most obvious example in the international context was the 2016 elections, where we had Facebook coming under scrutiny for the use of AI-generated images. Also, there were some cybersecurity concerns with Russia in the elections. But even in our local context, we have some examples of deepfakes. For instance, in the Nigerian elections, we had cases of deepfakes where we had to, where some media houses, what they did was they made sure that they created some fact-checking or verification sites. A very popular one, I'm very sure of anybody that interfaces with X knows that there's a fact-checking, there's some form of fact-checking going on the web, on the social media platform. So we had instances like that in our general elections. But even with media houses, particularly, for example, Amnesty International created some fake images in 2021 when there were some instances of police brutality in Colombia. And the reason people were able to detect that these images were fake was because some of the faces that appeared in the images were too smooth, because there are some ways sometimes you're able to tell when some images are deep fakes, although not always, because with the advancement of AI, we see generative AI, we see that it's getting much more difficult to detect what is real from what is fake. Let me even give an example. So a couple of days ago, I was in an online class, and sometime into the class, we're told to log into a website and try to decipher whether an image was fake or real. And I kid you not, half of the images that I said were fake, were real, were actually fake. So that was how bad it was. That was how difficult it was for me to differentiate what is real from what is fake anymore. That is how good generative AI has advanced. We've also had cases of AI generated images in the current ongoing war in Israel and Gaza, where some images have been generated on both sides. And DW, which is a German website, was able to fact check and flag down some of these images for members of the public to ensure that, we don't have echo chambers, we don't have instances where people run off of information in their head that actually did not exist. Because sometimes these images, what they do is they reinforce biases that you may have had towards one side or against another side. Another concern with another risk associated with AI misuse could be ethical concerns in AI adoption. So there are instances where persons become overly dependent or overly reliant on AI systems where they are not able to think for themselves, they're not able to generate anything for themselves. I don't know if this thing happens to anyone here, but I've heard some persons complain that, with ChatGPT these days, they don't necessarily have to think of anything they want to write. They just go there, they say this is what they want. ChatGPT just generates it for them, and then they sell it off as their work. We've had some academic content even coming into question the past few months with the use of generative AI. So as journalists, there has to be a line that has to be drawn. You cannot be so overly dependent on AI journalism that it robs you of your creativity, of your unique approach, or would I say your human approach to issues, to storytelling. So that is something to watch out for. I said here that this shift can affect how journalists and media professionals handle and perceive newsworthy content. Also, the use of AI in processing large volumes of personal and sensitive data highlights the need to, attend to privacy concerns and breaches that can undermine public trust. It's very difficult when you hear that, for example, if you were to hear, for example, a very popular TV channel, a very popular media outlet was to have created deepfakes. Subsequently, you begin to question everything that they put out there. You begin to question what are their motives, and then it robs journalism of that trust that is necessary for carrying out duties, that is necessary for communicating with audiences. The next one is AI bias. I think this topic will be flogged much better by Kingsley, but just to touch on it in a generic sense. AI systems are susceptible to bias and are only as good as the data they are trained on. Garbage in will mean garbage out. There's no magic to it. So we have to make sure that as journalists, when you are trying to curate your story, and you're trying to tell your story, it's not enough to just, even if you create the template or you have the ideas written down and you put it in the AI system, you type it in, it's not enough to just type it in. You have to make sure that whatever is generated as your result actually portrays your intent or the message you want to communicate to your audience. Because AI is not as it's not as nuanced as humans are, and storytelling can be very nuanced. I think, like I said, Kingsley will overflog this. I do not want to go too deeply into this for that purpose. So we'll be moving on to the benefits of AI-driven journalism. And let me say that while we have looked at the risks, and I purposely put the risks first because I wanted us to see the negatives before the positives so that we don't end on a bad note. I know that there's a lot of doom and gloom when it comes to AI. There's a lot of, fears that someone said here that AI could possibly take over a person's jobs. So we have to look at the benefits of AI because it has its good sides. And it's good that we focus sometimes on the good sides of AI so that we don't become too overwhelmed with the negatives. So the first benefit of AI, I believe that the last two speakers really, really concentrated on this. It was content creation and automated writing. AI will help you, especially because as a journalist, there are some repetitive tasks you may do, like maybe some publications that are expected of you, like financial reports, weather updates, sport news. These are contents that, they can be a bit regular. So AI is capable of doing that so that journalists can focus on tasks that are more complex, or tasks that are more nuanced and involve or require more time. So the next two slides, please. The next one will be capitalizing on trends. So the computational speed of AI is very effective because what the benefit of this is that AI is able to pick up on trends even before they become very popular, even before they become widespread. And this will allow journalists to be able to hop in on news as fast as possible, to follow recent developments or track news and be able to relay this to their audience. The next point will be fact-checking and verification of news sources. So AI can be very important in fact-checking fake news. I gave the example of the DW fact checker, which is a German site that was able to flag down some AI-generated content. So we have some local fact checkers in Africa. None of them really come to mind. I think, I would have to check where I wrote that down, but there are a couple of them here and there that have been very useful, especially for elections. So what they're able to do is to flag down fake news and ensure that members of the audience do not internalize this fake news. Okay, can we get this session? I believe so. I'm not able to answer that question, Natasha, but I would find out and let you know. So media outlets have a responsibility to ensure that the information that they are presenting to their audience is verifiable, true, and consistent. Also, we have data analytics and data visualization. So AI is able to enhance data analytics, data visualization with the use of multimodal content, like videos, like audios in communicating with audiences, the use of chatbots, the use of avatars, and what this does is it helps to create an impression in the minds of users. It helps to give them a seamless experience. It helps to give them a seamless experience, and it helps to the information or the news that is being translated to the audience to stick better in the mind of the audience, to have a better impression in the mind of the audience. Next slide, inclusion and accessibility. So the use of video, audio content, it can be very important. Transcribing can be very important in breaking down language barriers. You are able to listen to news in a different language from the one because there could be transcriptions, automated transcriptions and subtitles. And this can also be very useful for persons living with disabilities because then they are able to also have a seamless experience, and they're able to also keep up to date with what is going on in media, and it creates for a well-informed society. Next point. So the other uses of AI tools can be for writing efficiency, where we have tools like Grammarly. Please, I do want to say something. If you're making use of Grammarly, I found out, I think yesterday, that sometimes, if there's a particular place, you will have to turn off your Grammarly from being able to read your personal data. Let me explain. Okay, so someone found out yesterday that when she was making use of her Grammarly, it seems as if they've had some contracts with some of these large LLMs. So sometimes your data may be used. So if you're making use of Grammarly, please make sure that if you're a media outlet, you're a journalist, you turn off anything that can, be used, any form of personal data that can be used to train Grammarly or any other LLM by reason of contract agreements. So the next point is commercialization. So for content creators especially, AI can provide opportunities for journalists, content creators to commercialize their content, to sell reports, create newsletters, bulletins that they can issue at a subscription or licensing fee. Okay, so I'm almost coming to the end of my slide. Please bear with me. We just have about 2 more slides left. Okay, so media organizations have to establish clear ethical guidelines, policies, and regulations to govern the use of AI. And it is important that when you're using AI in your office, you are not quiet about it. You don't just use AI alone. Everybody has to know HR. Everybody has to be aware that you are making use of AI, especially for professional activities, because you can't be using AI in carrying out your job as a journalist working in a media house, and the media house you're working with is not aware, so that you don't create any form of liabilities for your media house. So the last slide is just some practices that media houses, journalists, content creators can take note of when they are engaging with AI systems. The first one is that if you are working as a media house, you should have an ethical AI framework. And that framework is what you will use to train your employees on how to make use of AI systems. Employees within organizations have to be trained regularly from time to time on how to make use of AI, the limits to what they can use AI for in the professional setting, so that you don't incur liabilities, so that you don't infringe on person's personal data, or have some copyrighted lawsuits waiting for you in the future. The next one is that there should be stringent policies to protect data privacy and security of persons that you are collecting their data, persons that you are interviewing, persons that you want to tell their story. You have to make sure that their personal data is protected. Also, companies should enforce a human-in-the-loop approach. I mentioned that when you pass something through an AI system and you get an output, you have to make sure that you go through it. So in the process where maybe a media house persons are able to generate content, there has to be someone that is editing, that is going through. A human in the loop is a person that is going through AI-generated content to ensure that it reflects the intentions, the ideas, and the principles of the media house, of the media outlet, of the journalists involved. Also, media houses should disclose to members of the public when AI is generated. And they can also collaborate with AI developers, like the case that we saw previously with New York, Chicago Tribune, and New York Daily Times. So we saw that their content was being scraped off their website, but what ChatGPT should have done was they should have established a form of licensing contract with them where they could use their data to train their AI. We should need to have more instances of media houses being willing to collaborate with AI developers to license their content. Because believe me, whether or not you give them content, they will get content from somewhere. So it's always best that you have a form of scheme where you're able to generate revenue for yourself in the process. That will be it from me on AI and journalism and regulations.